Hello, everybody. You are listening to Through Time and Clades, and if you are listening chronologically, then you are listening to the final episode of Through Time and Clades for the time being. My name is Albert.
And I'm Joan.
Yes, this is a bit of a surprise announcement, I suppose. Although those of you who are following us on Patreon will probably have heard of this already, but yes, it is true, as the title suggests. We are intending to bring this show to an end, even though we still had some ongoing series and such we had not finished. But before we elaborate on that, I guess let's give one last update, on the show. Just talk about how we're doing. So, how are you?
I've been doing all right. I've just been super busy working on art commissions and planning out how the rest of the year is going to go. There's a lot of interesting life updates that we've been working on that we're trying to make sure, where me and my family are, or where I'm going to be in the next year or two. But, I've been keeping on, with my readings and following up on research and so forth, just working and doing what I can. How about you?
Yeah, I would say I've also been keeping busy, and I know I constantly say that on the show, but I would say it's a good kind of busy. I've been making a lot of good progress with my research projects, both finishing up some and starting others. But yeah, as you might imagine, that's been taking up a good amount of my time, and I think that kind of feeds into our motivation for ending this show, I suppose.
Yeah, it's just it's not an easy decision to make, but we've both been thinking. We've been relatively busy, like fairly busy, with life and work, and it's gotten to a point where work on the show has taken on a little bit less, and then a little bit less priority.
Mm,
Um, Taking a little longer to get episodes out, get episodes prepared.
right.
Um, some of the, Admittedly, some of the enthusiasm has kind of worn away somewhat. Not to say that we're not interested in paleontology or anthropology or anything like that anymore. It's just, our minds are directed elsewhere to other
Right.
things. I mean, Albert, goodness, you're actually out there doing paleontology already, and that's a big enough task as it is. Um, so, we've been thinking, well, we got to think about like what's important and where our energies are lying,
Right.
and we made the tough call that for now, it's for the best that we pull the plug on Through Time and Clades. But of course, we didn't want to just up and say bye bye without having a little bit of a fun tour down memory lane.
Right.
I mean, goodness knows, 5 years of working on this YouTube show has been an incredible adventure, and we've
Hmm.
made a lot of great memories and learned a lot of fascinating things too. So, what we wanted to do for this sort of farewell episode is just kind of briefly go over some of our thoughts and reflections and memories of working on the show, and kind of take stock and survey of what we've covered and what we didn't cover, and
Hmm.
also just give a big thanks to everybody who helped support us.
Hmm.
Seems like a pretty good idea, don't you think?
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself.
So let's go ahead and let's jump to the next slide, and let's reflect a little bit on where we've been. Oh my gosh, I mean, July 2020 was when we premiered Through Time and Clades, so that's been about 5 years ago
Hmm.
during the height of COVID.
Yeah.
Um, because ultimately this was born of COVID. I remember the string of events very, very familiarly, even though it seems like millennia has passed since
Hmm.
then, right?
Yeah.
2020 was like 20 years ago. But yeah, I had just moved back home because COVID was affecting work and it was making it very difficult to make money and support myself. In fact, I know a lot of us did that.
Mm.
Um, and while we were there, there was plenty of time online. It was certainly safer than going out in public and risking exposure. And so one of our dear friends got together and they set up a charity stream, a paleo themed charity stream called Dino Nerds for Black Lives, where we invited a good handful of paleontologists from around the world to talk about their work and present their findings and interests, all while raising money and awareness for Black Lives Matter causes. and that was a huge success. It's amazing, even looking back now, how much we were able to put together in such a short amount of time. I mean, if I remember correctly, it was like what, like a week or two from proposal to execution.
Something like that. Yeah, it was. Yeah, thinking about it now, that was ridiculously short. Yeah.
Especially to get so many paleontologists on board
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
But everyone was super supportive. It was a lot of fun. We had some embargoed content, so that was pretty exciting. But yeah, during that, Albert and I decided, well, one of the things that we could do to contribute was resurrect our old college radio series, Incidents and Reflections, for one last hurrah, talking about some paleo and anthropology studies in between all of the talks and discussions. And it worked out very well. And both of us kind of got thinking after the fact that wow, that was we still got it, because by that point we had well, I mean, we graduated college, so we weren't doing Incidents and Reflections for some time,
Right.
but we still kind of had some of that spark in us, and that got us thinking, well, okay, what could we do with this? And lo and behold, we got together and we built up and created Through Time and Clades, which, if I remember correctly, that was your idea to come up with the title.
Oh, it might have been, yeah.
I feel like it because you're always pretty good with these creative titles, and it has a nice zing to it, a nice ring, and it's good for abbreviations too.
Right.
And so yeah, so from there we set up the goal of doing a monthly news episodes on top of our two big lecture series. Of course, Albert's Dinosaurs, the second chapter, which was about the origin and evolution of crown birds, and then my Humanity, a prologue, which was essentially a condensed history of human prehistory up until about the rise of the earliest states and even a little bit into the future, which I say condensed. If you've listened to the lecture series as a whole, like, yes, that is condensed.
Right.
It was hard to leave stuff out, but honest to goodness, that is a crash course in human prehistory, which goes to show that there's a lot of it. But of course, it's safe to say that for Dinosaurs, the second chapter, there's a lot of birds out there, and there's actually a lot that we know about their fossil record and evolutionary history. So I think it's safe to say that between the two of us, like, some of our fondest memories, and certainly one of our biggest successes for this channel, was performing and then completing these lecture series the way that we did. Do you have any thoughts about working on Dinosaurs second chapter?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's plenty I could say, but I would definitely agree that working on those lecture series was a highlight of like the early part of the show for sure. And I think in a lot of ways they were really the groundwork for the channel. Like they were, in a sense, like the main projects we wanted to do when we were working on the show. Of course, we had a lot of fun with the news episodes too, but the thing that was really driving us forward, I think, was completing these lecture series. And in the end, we managed to do it, which was quite incredible, considering the amount of time and effort that it took and the amount of information we were trying to summarize. And those were still really great projects, I think. Certainly, at least as far as I'm aware, at the time, I don't think anybody else had really like tried to do like a YouTube explainer series about the evolution of modern birds and the modern bird fossil record. And of course, thinking back or looking back on these older projects, you do have some reflections about things you could have done better. Several of the videos in my series, and a few certainly in your series too, were very long. Like they were multiple hours long, and at the time maybe that wasn't such a bad thing because people were looking for long form content to listen to during the pandemic. But on a day-to-day basis nowadays, when we're kind of back into our busy schedules, it's understandably a lot harder for people to get into this type of content. I feel like maybe if this were designed in a different context, we would have focused more on like making the episodes more condensed and more compact, at least each individual one, even if we're covering the same amount of material. Nonetheless, I'm really happy to have been able to complete Dinosaurs the second chapter and to have participated in recording Humanity, a prologue. They certainly would rank among like my favorite works that we've done with this channel. That's for sure.
Oh, absolutely, and I would agree. Humanity of Prologue was not just fun to explain to people, but it was also a fun learning experience
Mm-hmm.
because I got to really dig into a lot of the literature that I wasn't too familiar with. I come away from that with a greater understanding and appreciation of the history of humans on this planet and
Mm-hmm.
how much we've been able to learn and how much we still have left to learn. There are broad swaths of the planet that have fascinating human histories that you just don't really hear about in mainstream media. And so if I was able in some way to help point the camera forward towards that, I'm certainly grateful for the opportunity. Just the fact of being able to complete these at all is really incredible. Of course, with these lecture series came the inevitability that, with all things in science and history, they're ongoing processes. You know, they're not written in stone, so to speak. Even if some of the evidence is, and so it constantly requires updates and corrections and revisions and sometimes outright rejections for a lot of material. And so we tried our best to kind of keep up with the times and do several update specials for
Mm-hmm.
these series. But of course, even with those, it got to a point where some of these fields move very
Yes.
quickly, and the amount that we wanted to update often
Right.
went beyond. They could be their own lecture series if we wanted
Mm-hmm.
to. So, admittedly, those became a little bit unwieldy over time.
Yep.
But it did just go to show that you know, for anyone interested in paleoanthropology or bird paleontology, like you are not at a loss for content. That's for sure. In fact, it got to the point where I at least had started a sequel series
Mm-hmm.
to Humanity of Prologue just to keep up with all the information. Of course, what will remain of that we'll get into a little bit later.
Sure.
But definitely our lecture series were some of our big highlights. And as well, we did reviews.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these reviews for our show, because we didn't just review films, you know, we would review books, we would review websites, really any sort of media that was relevant to our interests and to the topics that we covered on the show, we felt were pretty fair game. And so we had a lot of great memories putting together some of those reviews. Now, we talked a little bit about it, and Albert, I think you had mentioned that your personal favorite review that we did was the defunct paleontology websites.
Right.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that the inspiration for that essentially was kind of reflecting on the amount of time that we had spent on the internet in our childhoods, and kind of how we got exposed to a lot of paleontology information and paleontology content. That's a bit of a loaded word, but you know what I mean, right? In that way, and then that also came with the realization that a lot of these websites were either no longer around anymore or had stopped updating. We decided to kind of take a trip down memory lane and discuss some of our memories of these websites, just so they can be remembered. Because as we explained in the episode, I feel like in many ways they kind of left a pretty big impact on it. It's just really interesting to kind of think back and look back on these memories. When it comes to review episodes, like speaking of episodes being really long and unwieldy for listeners to listen to, I think the defunct paleontology website episode is the longest singular episode we've ever done. And as you can see on the slide here, it was almost 5 hours long. So yeah, and many of our other reviews too went on for multiple hours, between the 3 to 4 hour range. So I think if there were any of our releases that were especially listener unfriendly, the review episodes would be those. However, I also think the review episodes, just in general, were some of the most fun episodes that we've ever recorded, just to make. In a way, in many cases, it's we're bringing a very unique perspective to these topics. Who else has talked about defunct paleo websites? At least the specific selection of defunct paleo websites that we have. As far as I know, no one else has. I think in a way we kind of made an interesting niche for ourselves by releasing some of these episodes. And before we go on to your favorite, I definitely remember very well some of our other reviews that we did. Obviously, I enjoyed being able to talk about Doraemon on the show, but also probably another one in the vein of there aren't any other people talking about this was the TV series, Story of Perrine, that we discussed, because we both of us watched, in my case, rewatched that series during the pandemic times, and we both came away really liking it, and we're like, oh, well, nobody else is talking about this show. Why don't we talk about it? Even though it's a little bit out of our usual wheelhouse, it's not directly related to natural history, but we both had some really, I guess, strong feelings and thoughts about that series, and so it was really fun to talk about that too. That's essentially kind of my takeaway from having done these reviews. They're really fun. I mean, honestly, like I know they are very long and intimidating episodes, but like if you have the time, and especially if you yourself have ever experienced any of these pieces of media, I really encourage you to go and listen to them when you have the time. You can take them by parts. It's not like they're going anywhere. At least we don't plan on moving them anywhere. I think those are some of my favorite episodes that we've ever made.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just the chance to not only gush and info dump about media that we really like,
Mm-hmm.
kind of the realization that the way that we consume media is probably like similar to how a lot of people will do it. In that for us, we're not just like watching a show or a film or reading a book and then walking away like, oh, that was fun. What's next? Um, we almost kind of like take it and make it part of ourselves
Right.
and part of our own journeys. Like it was very hard to pick a favorite
Mm.
review, to be completely honest,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean there were a lot of runner-ups. I mean, with the Dawn of Everything
Oh
review,
yeah.
I had just read the book and wanted to synthesize everything that I had read about it so I could understand it and appreciate it more and easier. Also just appreciating the scholarship behind it. So that was a really great experience.
Mm-hmm.
With like reading the Memoirs of Cleopatra, a historical fiction novel that nonetheless was very historically informed and was probably one of the best books that I have ever read, period. Just wanting to put my thoughts out there and hope other people who hadn't heard about it, even though it's many decades old now,
Mm-hmm.
could get a taste for it. But I think I ended up settling with our Encanto review,
Mm-hmm.
which admittedly we had to break up into three parts, even though they probably would rival the length of the defunct paleo websites
Right.
or Story of Peru review.
Right.
Um, Simply because the movie had been relatively new. It just come out not too long ago. It was very popular. Probably one of the Walt Disney Animation Studios' best films of this current era, I would
Mm.
argue. Um, but it was also kind of a gateway to learning more about Colombia. Honestly, like you get people that watch films and
Mm.
they're like, "Oh, that was fun," and they don't really think about it. It's just a movie. Let's move on.
Mm.
Um, but for me, like I took this like, I mean, beyond like the wonderful characters and the story and the music and everything, I wanted to know more about Colombia and
Mm.
its history and culture and wildlife. And this was a great opportunity to do so.
Right.
The research for this review was very fun. And in many ways, I came away with a greater appreciation for the film as a response.
Mm-hmm.
And just as an opportunity to kind of reflect on the media that we consume by doing an in-depth look behind it.
Yep.
Not in terms of like production history or character design, but in terms of like this is a real world setting. These are real people who live here. This is a real landscape. Um, let's talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about like what inspired this movie that did so well. And we can only hope continues to benefit the people of Colombia in some way in terms of exposure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, beyond the whatever terrible news or whatnot that you might hear about or stereotypes. Um, and I really appreciated that we got a chance to do that. And yeah, echoing what you said, I mean, if you can take the time to check it out and hear us out, um, I only hope that you come across with a greater appreciation for the sort of material, as well as with any of our reviews, really. Um, it is neat to kind of dissect these sorts of things
Mm-hmm.
and to kind of see like kind of like the genesis of these projects and how they came to be and how they reflect the state of knowledge at the time, right? I think about our mini review for Phil Tippett's Go Motion projects.
Mm.
We did one with Prehistoric Beast and Dinosaur together.
Right.
Just kind of seeing, hey, this was a pretty important period of paleontology at the time, the late 80s. Um, how did the seemingly normal stop motion project end up reflecting so much of what we knew at the time, and still, in my opinion, is probably like the pinnacle of dinosaur stop motion projects. You know, I truly believe that it didn't get any better than this. Um, so definitely, like I would agree that our reviews were probably some of the funnest experiences that we've ever had. And oh, you know, there's a lot more that we could have certainly talked about.
Yeah, we
As
had
a,
plans to do a lot more, but yeah.
absolutely, but you know, it is what it is. Now, I will say that our interviews, I'm really proud and humbled that we were able to secure the few interviews that we could for Through Time and Clades. Um, because it was one of those things like, well, you know, what do people do on podcasts? They interview people. Well, we should probably do something like that. Um, and so I'm grateful that we at least got a couple of interviews out there while we were still around.
Yeah.
I think in terms of highlights for me, again, it's hard because you know people are fascinating to talk about, and when we wanted to let them have a chance to you know speak their truth, anywhere from you know talking with Adasaur or talking with you know our friend Meg or you know Miles Greb and Trey the Explainer, of course, who themselves have their own super popular podcast that goes into a lot of the same material that we're interested in. It was neat to kind of like you know share our thoughts and share our stories and just kind of learn a little bit about people behind um, you know the profile pictures that we see on our social media. Albert, do you have any thoughts about our interviews?
They were definitely really fun to do too. And yeah, you're right. I think one of the things that makes interviews so enjoyable, and it's probably why so many other podcasts like to do them, is that having other people on the show, it really brings a new type of energy and of course brand new perspectives to the topics that we discuss, and also the range of topics that we discuss even. So I think all of the interviews that we have done, even though we didn't do that many, were really interesting to do. I know interviews were something else that we had discussed like wanting to do more of, but of course the problem, I guess, kind of the flip side of doing interviews is that they're a lot harder to arrange. Like obviously if we're just doing episodes where it's just the two of us talking, then we just have to make sure to find the time when both of us are available. But when you're kind of inviting somebody else, or even like more than one guest on the show, then that can be a bit more of a difficult thing to handle when it comes to scheduling, and not to mention things like making sure all the tech works and that everybody is on the same page about how it's going to go and how long we're going to make this episode and so on and so forth. And logistics are a bit more challenging to wrangle, but nonetheless, I also really enjoyed like all the interviews that we've done, and they definitely bring like a unique flavor to the show for sure.
Absolutely. And you know, again, like our reviews, there are certainly more people that we would have liked to have talked to. Um, but because it's a big wide world of paleo communication out there. But I'm certainly very grateful for the opportunities that we've been able to have already.
Yep.
And so, as well as all of these, of course, we had our news episodes, and boy howdy, were those a blast to do, because it's one thing to summarize a given topic for a lecture series
Right.
or pull information to supplement a review, but our news episodes were really grab bags. The genesis of our news episodes really kind of tied into our Discord group. So, a bit of a fun fact. I'm sure some of you might be curious, how do we find stories to talk about on the show? Well, we have a Discord group full of our friends, and on one of the subtabs, we dump papers. You know, whenever we come across scientific papers that had just come out or relatively new, and we think that they might be of relevant interest to our friends, we put them there. And so by the end of like each month, we'd have a sizable record of like all of the major, or at least all of the popular news stories that caught our eye. And so it's like, okay, well, let's look at June and all the stories that we posted from June, and let's think about which ones we might want to talk about.
Right.
Because we made an effort to give a little bit more attention to stories that maybe aren't as popular or wide ranging as others. You know, it's always easy when a new hominin or a new dinosaur is published and everybody's talking about it for weeks on end. But then, like, there might be a paper about, this little beetle or a new type of fungus or a group of organisms that is typically seen as background fodder, that nonetheless could be as fascinating and as neat as the big dinosaur or the new hominin. And so we wanted to take the opportunity to try to highlight more of those studies and get a broader perspective of the history of the Earth and the diversity of life. And so then the question begs, well, how did we do? Let's go to the next slide and we'll actually see that we decided to take this initiative. So I went through all of our news stories that we covered, everything that was not included in a lecture series or in a review, just our news stories. And I wanted to kind of calculate how much of each of a given topic we've covered. And so I came up with a classification based upon, a broad sweep of organismal groups, as well as like basic anthropology stuff and miscellaneous topics. And Albert agreed to it. And I went ahead and I plugged it all into a pie chart. And this is what we got. So I think no surprises. We are very interested in dinosaurs and mammals.
Yep.
And so they have a pretty big distribution in terms of the stories that we covered. But I will also say that we surprisingly did a fairly good job of covering all of the other groups of life on Earth in a fairly decent way. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say so. Definitely, I think to an extent it is unavoidable that we would focus so much on our personal favorite topics. So in my case, it would be Maniraptor and theropod dinosaurs, including birds, and in your case, anthropology and perhaps also mammals more broadly. And so certainly those particular categories span over half of the topics that we covered. But nonetheless, I agree. We were able to cover other forms of life or broader kind of topics in biology, I suppose, fairly well considering. I know on some occasions I didn't exactly help because I think there were a few times, especially when we were doing year-end roundups or whatever, where I was like, okay, I'll just pick all my favorite stories about birds or about Maniraptorans or something like that. So obviously that feeds into the total dinosaur count. But even considering that, we covered a lot of other things. I'm a little surprised actually at how much we covered on for some of these categories. We did apparently 20 stories about fishes and over 20 for aquatic invertebrates. We did quite a few plant stories too. So it is really cool that we were able to kind of attain this pretty broad taxonomic representation. Even if it's still not really representative of the true diversity of life on Earth, the actual relative proportions, which would make this a very different show if that were the case. But we were still able to give other organisms outside of our immediate interests their due, I think. So I think we can certainly be very happy about that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I'm definitely delightfully surprised too that it worked out the way that we did, because we did try to make an effort to go broad with our group coverage. I pushed for more plant studies, more things on invertebrates especially. And again, lo and behold, they were as fascinating, if not more fascinating, than some of the dinosaurs and mammals that we talked about. I mean, I don't want to oversell it by saying that the diversity of life on this planet is incredible. And even for people like us, who I like to think are pretty widely read and familiar with kind of much of the history of the Earth and the kind of catalog of animals and plants and microbes that we've found, there are still things that we're not familiar with. Even to this day, I'm still learning about animals and plants I had never heard of before. And even growing up, little me with these giant encyclopedic photographic books that talk about all the different animals, there are still plenty of groups that are just outside my radar.
Right.
And also just there's still a lot that we don't know, and we're still learning about familiar animals too.
Yep.
I mean, you think about elephants and sharks and giraffes. Oh, there's plenty of things that we still would like to know about these animals. As familiar as we are, and as often as we see them, don't think that we have it all figured out. hell, I mean, even our own domestic pets,
Right.
we're learning new things about them.
Yep.
Um, Garden plants, you know. So it's a fascinating experience for sure. And I think if I didn't have more appreciation already, I definitely did after working on a lot of these news stories that often required like going to the literature to see, you know, what are the summary informations that we know about these groups before going into the news stories themselves. Now, I will just state for the record that there were a couple of groups that unfortunately we did not get the chance to really talk about extensively, um, that I noticed when I was doing this survey. So we did not cover echinoderms, which is the group of animals that includes, you know, sea stars, urchins, crinoids, kind of the spiny skin armored animals that have hydraulic skeletons. We did not cover arachnids. So these are spiders, scorpions, mites, solifugids. You know, basically, you know, the eight-legged creepy crawlies that people either love or despise. That are no doubt very familiar to a lot of people in certain parts of the world. We did not cover plesiosaurs among the reptiles, but you know, besides that, I mean, we covered most of the major groups of animals and plants. We just managed to get fungi covered, which is really cool. And of course, in terms of more broad strokes, you know, we would talk about like bacteria here and there, but nothing super extensive. But on the whole, I think I'm pretty happy with what we ended up with. And as always, you know, the news story picking process could often be difficult. I
Right.
mean, sometimes there's like 10 stories we wanted to cover. We had to narrow it down to like one or two or
Yep.
three. Um, so goodness knows, in another universe, if we were working on this show, this pie chart might be different subtly, but definitely, in the interest of keeping up with our lecture series, I think it made sense that we would constantly refer back to Maniraptors and hominins, just as sort of a way to update our lecture series without necessarily doing an update special,
Right.
if that makes sense. Gosh, it's been a journey thinking about through time and clades. You know, at the time of recording, we hit 1,470 subscribers. Not too bad. We've had some pretty good viewership over the years. Several fun comments and people reaching out and helping promote our show, which we're always super grateful for.
It was always fun when authors of the papers that we talked about would like comment and say, "Hey, thanks for covering our paper."
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes us feel really good because again, you know, we wanted to highlight papers that deserve to be highlighted. They're just as important as the big flashy ones. So it does make me feel really good that we've had some author attention given our way. So I'm sure the big question for a lot of our viewers now is, well, where do we go from here? Let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about that. We like to say never, right? Like, you know, this might be the closing chapter of our show, but you know, if we could resurrect Instants and Reflections for our charity stream, at least in a small way, well, who knows what the future brings, right? The only predictable thing about life is its unpredictability, and you never know when that itch will come back. So, if any of you are curious to keep up with us and our journeys from there, we have a couple links here that you can use to find us. I'm still on Twitter, reluctantly. I have been trying to use Blue Sky more because I am finding that that is a pretty nice environment. And occasionally, I still use Tumblr. Like, as far as my social media presence goes, it's mainly to share stories or art that I might be interested in. Maybe I'll expand those from there, but who knows? But basically, my handle is Killdeer Cheer, inspired by my favorite bird. Um, so if you find that name, you'll know it's me. What about you, buddy?
Right. So I use the handle Albertonicus basically almost everywhere. That's a type of albatrosaur. Indeed, it's the type of albatrosaur that my avatar on the show is supposed to be, just like how your avatar is a killdeer. And yes, so I still follow people on Twitter, but I don't really post on it much anymore. So if you are interested in finding out what I'm up to or what I'm currently interested in at the moment, either Blue Sky or Tumblr are probably the best places to keep up with that. I do post artwork online sometimes when I have the time to draw, and so those will be found on my DeviantArt and Instagram accounts. And I also cross-posted those to Blue Sky and Tumblr as well. So basically, if you follow me on those places, you'll get everything. And I also run a science blog on Blogspot called Raptor Maniacs. It's a blog I've had for a very long time. And that's where I when I feel like it, post longer form articles just discussing science and research, usually related to Maniraptor and dinosaurs. However, that being said, it's pretty difficult for me to find time or motivation to write long blog articles these days, so it's not especially active, but it is still there if you are interested in kind of following it. With that said, do we want to talk a little bit about possible future extensions of the show, like possible alternative ways of continuing our series?
Well, certainly. I've been thinking a little bit about maybe going the blog route in a way. I don't know necessarily if I would call it Through Time and Clades, or even have it be an extension of Through Time and Clades. Obviously, elephant in the room. I just started this lecture series only to end the show, so I do have some interest in continuing that in some way, even if it is in blog posts to read.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it would just be a question of where would I post, and of course, I think automatically one thought comes: well, I have a Tumblr, be a way to use it again.
Right.
But I feel like that would require some major restructuring, and my Tumblr is, like my other social media accounts, very random. Sometimes you'll get actual science stuff. Sometimes it's a cool pinup that I find, or a meme. So it's kind of scattered. So maybe I could make a sub Tumblr in that case, and that's linked to my official Tumblr, so it's me, and go from there. That's kind of an idea that I had. And topic-wise, it would be about as broad as our show. Maybe even going more into like current events or that sort of thing. That's sort of what I've been thinking about. What about you?
Yeah, so of course, Dinosaurs: The Second Chapter, at least the main series, has ended, but for those of you who are longtime followers of us, you might recall that we actually did have an idea way back when we just finished both of our series, at least, in your case, the first season of Humanity: A Prologue, where we were thinking about designing a personal website, essentially, kind of restating a lot of the information that we presented in our series in more detail and with more up-to-date information, and in a different format, that is a website, instead of like a podcast or video podcast that you have to watch/listen to, which for many people might be a more convenient way of accessing that information. And I still think that is a good idea. It's just that we kind of ran out of time and energy to work on the websites, which is why we never made those public. And I am still interested in working on it at some point, and maybe if I don't have to spend time working on the show, maybe I could focus more on it. So that might be something I'd like to do for Dinosaurs: The Second Chapter, is like kind of build it up as a website, and like I said, like with more up-to-date information and more detail, and then kind of run it as this freely available resource for people to use if they want to learn more about modern bird evolution. That being said, I'm not making any promises here. I'm just saying that this is an idea I would like to do, but it would depend on, again, time and motivation. And there is another remaining question regarding kind of the future of the things we've done on the show, and that is, of course, we just started another new series in addition to the second season of Humanity: A Prologue, and that was our new paleo art series, Beyond the Canvas, which we've only released one episode of so far. And that series, as you would know if you've listened to that first episode, was mostly designed and presented by our friend Ilari. So he has a say in what happens to that in the future. But I will say for now that if you were looking forward to new installments of that series, there is a non-zero chance that the information he wanted to present will be continued in some form. Now, that might not necessarily be in the form of a podcast or a video podcast. It might be, we don't know yet. Nothing's set in stone, but that project may continue in a different form. If you want to find out when it does, you can go ahead and follow our friend Ilari on his socials. I believe he is Pelican Man on Blue Sky, and I think Otis sketching on Tumblr. So I imagine if he does anything new with the Paleo Art series, that's where that will be announced.
Yeah, again, it is kind of. I'm sure it's probably a little bit shocking that we have these newest series only to end the show, but
Yeah.
no, I think there's probably still life in the show in some way, shape, or form. It just depends on how we go about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if you follow us on our socials, certainly you will hear about it from there. I mean, did we think when we were ending Incidents and Reflections that we would do a series like this
Nope.
that was inspired by that? Again, that's life for you. It's fascinating and it changes all the time, and oftentimes you can't really predict where it's going to be in a year or
Right.
two,
Yeah.
or even within the next couple of weeks. It's fascinating to think about.
Just to quickly add on to that, like one of the things I feel like I've learned over the years, just in general, is that your time is precious, right? And so you want to be spending the time that you can on things that you're motivated to do and enjoy doing. And I've really enjoyed working on the show, and like just that in recent times, presenting it in this format has been taking its toll on me. And so what I'm trying to say is essentially take care of yourself. Like you don't have to feel pressured into continuing things if you don't feel motivated to do them anymore. Like obviously, it's always a very difficult decision to make, and you might have very mixed feelings about it. But if you're not really vibing with something, then go try doing something else. And with that, I think we can move on to kind of closing matter.
Certainly, definitely to echo on that, ending a project is not failure.
Mhm.
I agree completely. But yes, absolutely. Let's jump to our next slide, and we really wanted to thank our supporters on Patreon over the years for helping us continue the show and bring us so much that we've been able to present here. It's very sweet and humbling to have the support of so many people behind us. So we wanted to take an opportunity to thank everybody personally, everybody, not just the people who subscribe to the major tiers who are owed shout outs. We wanted to take stock of everybody and thank them for following and supporting us and just being super awesome people.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna try to read everybody out here as a special thank you finale shout outs. So big thanks to my sister, Julie Gaines, and our good friends and followers, Paul Hopkins, Denver, Ilari Patila, Frankish, Valdenunzio, Tristan Stock, Mario Corio, Juan UC, Brian Swain, Dmitry Pernock, Pav Pavlova, John Joseph Ziak, Sophie M, Nubaraptor, Zay Pedro Ferreira, Sandy Lee, Nelio, Denise Mock, Dino Boy 1, David Sprinkle, Patrick Horton, Grenade Frog, Jacob Wheeler, Carolina, and Salamander. Um, y'all are fantastic,
Mhm.
and it really means the world to us that you support us for as long as y'all have.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we hope to see more of y'all in the future, no matter where we go, because y'all are amazing. Just to reiterate our Patreon message for those who actually saw that, we did make the choice to make it fully public so anybody could see it who finds our Patreon. But we will be shutting down our payments. We will be essentially closing our Patreon. As of this recording, we will be ceasing accepting payments and donations. But again, we want to reiterate that we appreciate all of y'all's support and for following us over these last 5 years. It's been amazing.
Mhm.
And I think with that, if we can go to the next slide, we'll close things out for good here. As always, of course, special thanks go to our dear friends for helping us out in creating this series.
Mhm.
Our dear friend Emily Thomas made the fantastic theme music that we've opened each and every episode with. It's a wonderful bop. They're great at making music. They're a wonderful person in general.
Mhm.
And we want to give them a huge thanks. And also, a super amazing person. We want to thank Alicia Hutchinson for creating the color scheme for Albert's Alvarezor avatar here. See this cheerful little fellow.
Mhm.
When I was designing these characters for us, I wanted to think, well, okay, what's a good color scheme for an Alvarezor? And Albert, I think you directed me towards
Mhm.
Alicia's fan art of your kind of online presence,
Right.
because your avatar has basically been this Alvarezsaur chucking into a tree stump as long as I've known you.
Yeah,
Um,
pretty much.
and of course, it's a black and white image, and so Alicia had come along and designed a cool color scheme
Yep.
for this dinosaur. And I'm like, let's do it. Hence what we have here, which is fantastic. I'm grateful that I got the chance to kind of share some of my art in this way by making these little characters and even updating them uh, slightly over time. Some of you might recall from our earliest episodes, my killdeer didn't have the white feathers on the other side of the wing,
Ah,
like killdeers actually
right.
do. So I went ahead and put that in there myself in the subsequent recordings. So that's a fun little Easter egg. So you can tell when it's an old episode versus a new episode
Right.
of Through Time and Clades by looking at my inside right wing.
Right.
um, but oh my gosh, what an adventure! What a journey! Definitely my closing thoughts as a whole on working with Through Time and Clades and creating this and building this with you, buddy. It's that it's amazing nowadays how somebody can put something out into the world,
Hmm.
right? You think about not very long ago, it was quite a bit of work. You had to know people.
Yep.
You had to find the right resources. You had to dig for the information to, make a movie or write a book or make a radio show. But thanks to the internet, anybody can do it
Hmm.
with relatively, simple means and with the right resources. Now, whether it, goes off into the stratosphere, that's the whims of time and chance. But I'm certainly grateful that we've been able to make something like this
Hmm.
and not only reach so many people, but have such a positive response as well. And I think it's just been amazing that this is something that we can do, in the world right now.
Yeah.
And it's just been wonderful. It's been a real treat. What about you? Do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. We are living in interesting times, and in many ways, that's a bad thing. But there are also benefits. So we all have to do what we can and live our lives as best as we are able to, whatever the circumstances allow. And I certainly look forward to new adventures from here on out.
Absolutely. I would agree with that as well. Well, with that, this is the end of Through Time and Clades. Thank you all so much for joining us, and I'd say rather than say goodbye, till next time,
Mhm.
and farewell.
Take care, everybody.